Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Today is May 22nd, and we are going to do some work on S-124 and ideally vote for or against said bill. And Michael, I would love if you could take us through this. I believe you prepped us for it somewhat at some point. Is that true?
Maybe.
Okay.
Can I share the screen?
Now you can. Sorry.
So what is S-124 about? This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Counsel. The Clean Water Act requires certain permits for certain types of activities. One of those activities it requires a permit for is for discharges from concentrated animal feeding operations. What is a concentrated animal feeding operation? It's where you have animals for 45 days or more to store, feed, stable, etc. And the area where you keep those animals is denuded of vegetation. Vermont has been delegated by US EPA to implement that permit. And delegation means that EPA says that the state can implement all of the federal Clean Water Act permits. So stormwater, wastewater, industrial, MS4, and the CAFO permit. So Vermont's a delegated state. It's supposed to be implementing all of those federal permits according to the federal requirements. Well, a few years ago, environmental advocates petitioned EPA to say Vermont is not following the federal requirements for discharges from concentrated animal feeding operations. It has not permitted any discharges from concentrated animal feeding operations, even though there is evidence, including public records, that show that there have been discharges from concentrated animal feeding operations. EPA took that petition, they reviewed it, and they agreed with the environmental advocates and said, ANR, you have to enter a corrective action plan to ensure EPA that you are going to effectively implement the Clean Water Act permitting requirements for CAFOs. And if you don't, then EPA will have to determine whether to de-delegate. And de-delegate means taking away all of the permit authority, not just for the CAFOs, all of it. And so EPA would then be the one to do the permitting of all of those different permits in Vermont. So I only know of one state that even approached that limit. It was Wisconsin. They kind of thumbed their nose at EPA for a while. EPA initiated de-delegation, and Wisconsin said, we're sorry, please stop. And it took 5 years for EPA to stop. So that is the kind of scenario you're in, the scenario where EPA has required a corrective action plan. Part of that plan needs to be amendments to both statute and rule that clarify that ANR is the entity in the state that has permitting authority for discharges from concentrated animal feeding operations. But why do they have to clarify that? And that's because in 2004, when US EPA issued the rule, the CAFO rule for discharges, there was a part of the preamble of that rule that said states are encouraged to set up state-based programs, including through agencies of agriculture, which prevent farms from needing a discharge permit. And there were very influential people in state government that said, oh, that's what we need to do. And so the state set up a program at the Agency of Agriculture, where the Agency of Agriculture was regulating ag water quality. And one of the ways that you avoid getting a discharge permit from under NPDES is you don't have a discharge. And so the state agriculture program, water quality program prohibits farms from having a discharge. So, I mean, theoretically, that makes a lot of sense because if you don't have a discharge, you don't need a discharge permit. So just prohibiting it theoretically means that farms don't need this federal permit. But there have been discharges. And EPA has noted that ANR hasn't issued a CAFO permit to any farm in 20 plus years. And so that is, in order to maintain that delegation for every permit, in order for the state to continue running its own Clean Water Act programs, including the money you get from the Clean Water Act, there's this requirement to change this law. And I can walk through it generally, but overall, what the bill does is it clarifies that ANR is the one that determines if there is a discharge on a farm. Currently, there is a memorandum of understanding between the two agencies about how they respond to ag water quality issues, whether if there's a discharge, the agency of ag has to refer to the agency of natural resources. And if there's not a discharge, but still problems, does ANR refer back to the agency of ag? That MOU is going away. EPA is saying that MOU is confusing. It's not clear who the lead is under that MOU. The MOU is gone, and in its place is a document, no name, document, that EPA is going to approve in September regarding the roles and responsibilities of the two agencies. So a large part of what this bill does is it scrubs reference to the MOU. It scrubs reference to them working together in a way where the two of them are deciding whether or not there's a discharge. It's clear that ANR is the one determining the discharge, and those responsibilities are going to be set forth in a document that EPA approves for how the two work together. Now, from a revenue perspective, right now, large farms and medium farms pay a permit fee for their large farm permit or their medium farm permit. It's $2,500 a year for a large farm permit. It's $1,500 a year for a medium farm permit. But the large farm permit isn't just a water quality permit. The large farm permit was initially enacted as a land use permit. So when you are going to build a new large farm, 700 cows or more, most relevant in Vermont, or you are going to expand your medium farm to 700 cows or more, you have to go through a process that involves having a public hearing, listening to local officials, identifying issues you might have to address for noise, dust, vectors, pests. And so that I think most people want to continue because it involves your community in the expansion or creation of a large farm. But if you need two permits, are they paying two permit fees? And this bill says if you're required to get a large CAFO permit from ANR, you pay ANR the $2,500 and you don't pay the $2,500 to the agency of ag, but you still need to get that permit. If you're a medium farm, the medium farm operation permit is just a water quality permit. If you're required to get the medium CAFO permit from ANR, you're not paying the agency of ag anymore because you are now an ANR regulated farm and you pay that $1,500 a year to the agency of natural resources into their environmental permit. So it will take money potentially away from the Ag Water Quality Special Fund and put it into the environmental permit fund. I think you already know that the Ag Water Quality Special Fund doesn't cover all of the costs of ag water quality at the agency of ag, and you have to appropriate money, usually from the Clean Water Fund, to cover that. So you probably have to appropriate a little bit more on an annual basis once these CAFOs start to be permanent. So that's the overview. I can quickly move through the bill itself, which will be up on the screen. Section 1, your
Wait,
amendment.
sorry, 1 second. Representative Maslin, did you have a question before we went in?
I can wait till you finish my.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question.
Oh,
Michael? Are the agencies of ag and A&R in agreement on how to move forward, or are we imposing something upon them? This,
They propose this language. They have course corrected a couple of times, asked for changes that were made and asked for other changes that were not. Asked for a change to be made by one committee that was disagreed to by another committee, which I will highlight in a but they wrote a letter yesterday to House Environment by Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbets jointly, basically supporting the bill, but with looking for a change.
thank you.
Section 1 is an Agency of Agriculture, Ag Water section. You'll see that reference on line 17 to the MOUs being struck, and the Secretary of Ag cooperates with A&R in the implementation of the CAFO program, and they'll implement comprehensive, and the Agency of Ag will implement comprehensive complementary program. They'll coordinate, and then the reference to the detail about the MOU is being struck. And in its place, in consultation with US EPA and the Secretary of Ag, they shall issue a document that sets forth the respective roles and responsibilities. The document replaces the MOU. And that lets you go to another striking of the reference to the MOU in 2 places, page 4 and page 15 and 16. And this is the Committee on Agriculture proposal. Section 2 is another Agency of Ag Water Quality Program. This is the large farm section. One of the things that would change if you're required to get a CAFO permit is the buffers you would have. Right now, it's under state law, it's 25 feet between cropland and the top of bank of a water, 10 feet between cropland and a ditch. Under federal law, it's 35 feet of vegetated buffer, 100-foot or 100-foot of setback. Or you come up with alternative techniques that you show your state agency why you don't need a setback, which honestly is how a lot of states work. Then you get the permit for LFOs. This is the reverse Noah's Ark. 700 mature dairy animals or more, 1,000 cattle or cow-calf pairs makes you a large farm under federal law and under Vermont. You will see that there is a reference to the Agency of Ag issuing a written determination whether there is an unpermitted discharge at a large farm. That is being struck because the Agency of Natural Resources is the one that has to determine whether there's a discharge underneath EPA's directive, and you will see that language on lines 11 through 19. And you will see that A&R may direct a large farm to obtain the CAFO permit if required by the CAFO rules. They're not required to get the CAFO permit, it's referred back to the Agency of Agriculture. There's language about 2 or more farms not circumventing the permit requirement. I won't go into that detail. And then you get to the permit fee language. Person required to obtain an LFO permit pays $2,500 to the secretary during any calendar year in which they're required to get the large CAFO permit by A&R. They pay that fee and to A&R, which is $2,500. And they shall not be required to pay the $2,500 annual operating fee to the Agency of Ag. Then you get to the medium farms, you're still in an Agency of Agriculture statute. A lot of the same things that you just saw, striking of the MOU, referencing the document, referencing the fact that the Agency of Ag does not determine the discharge, the A&R determines the discharge. It's not required to get a discharge permit, CAFO permit, it's referred back to the Agency of Ag. And you're going to see that language immediately again in the same section, because this section is divided into an individual permit subsections and general permit subsections. So you see all of that same language again for the general permit. And then you come to two sections that are not related to EPA's objection. One is the seasonal application of manure. I think most people know that you cannot apply manure to ground in the state between December 15th and April 1. There is already authority in the RAPs, the required agricultural practices, that allows the Secretary of Ag to allow emergency exemptions. But that emergency exemption authority isn't actually referenced in statute. So the Agency of Ag asked for it to be referenced in statute. You're banned from land applying unless seasonally allowed according to this section or under an emergency exception set according to the criteria in the RAPs. Then there's a provision about small farm certification. Annually, certain small farms, those are that are above 50 animals, 50 cows, have to annually certify. It's a workforce workload issue for A&R, Agency of Ag. They're asking that they not be required to annually certify, that only new or newly identified small farms certify, and then the agency will require other farms to certify on a ongoing regular basis. Then you move out of the Agency of Agriculture's statutes and you move into A&R statutes. For this thing that's being done, the federal CAFO rules apply to waters of the United States. Vermont's water quality laws apply to waters of the state. They are different universes. Waters of the United States mean those waters that are interstate waters, those that cross state boundaries, those waters that are navigable in commerce and recreation, those tributaries of navigable or interstate waters, and those wetlands that have a surface connection with the interstate, navigable, or tributary. Whereas in Vermont, a water of the state is all rivers, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, lakes, springs, and all artificial or natural bodies of surface water. It is broader. And there was a discussion about whether or not
And
this,
it includes.
and it includes waters of the United
Okay,
States.
thank you. Okay.
And that's partly because we don't know really what waters of the United States are, because the administrations, both of them, all three of them, over the past 5 to 6 years have amended the federal rule about 4 to 5 times. And the Trump administration is going to amend it again. And so I would love to cite a specific CFR reference or statutory reference here. I don't know what it's going to be. And so that's why it just says as defined under the Federal Clean Water Act.
And I imagine it's very confusing for farmers if it all keeps on changing all the time. So sticking to state law that can stay consistent is maybe easier for farmers.
Farmers are one of the communities driving these multiple revisions because, right, if this program is applying to waters of the United States, it will obviously affect them. So then you move into a new subchapter of law enacted in A&R's authority. It is the Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation Program. There's that definition of AFO. It's very important because you can't be a CAFO unless you're an AFO. So
It's long been said.
a lot or facility where the following conditions are met. Animals have been, are, or will be stabled or confined and fed or maintained for a total of 45 days or more in any 12-month period, and crops, vegetation, or forage are not sustained in the normal growing season over any portion of the latter facility. The next subsection is just the circumvention provision. And then you get what a large CAFO is, 700 or more mature dairy, 1,000 or more cattle or calf pairs. Then you get what a medium CAFO is, 200 to 699 dairy, 300 to 999 cattle calf pairs.
You don't need to read all of it.
Okay. Well, one of the things that you do need to know is the medium farm CAFO, the medium CAFO trigger is this. You don't need a CAFO discharge permit unless you have waste that are discharged into water or a man-made ditch or other similar device, or the discharge originates outside of your AFO, outside your production facility, flows through it, or comes in direct contact with the animals confined in the operation. That's how you're a discharge for a medium CAFO. Then you can go to the creation of the program or the authority that the secretary has under the program. And this is probably the biggest sticking point between the Committee on Agriculture and the Committee on Environment. Because right now it says the secretary has authority to exercise all the following: implement the Federal Clean Water Act to administer a Vermont pollution discharge elimination system program that is consistent with and equivalent to the Federal Clean Water Act. That has been interpreted to be a ceiling, that the state could not go over or enhance or enact more restrictive or more protective measures if they were not consistent with and equivalent to the Federal Clean Water Act. You'll see your House Environment Committee is proposing to replace that phrase with a program that is as stringent as the Federal Clean Water Act. So could go above the Federal Clean Water Act and its enabling rules. That is where there is disagreement. That is where you will see the letter from the Secretaries of Ag and the Secretaries of Natural Resources asking for it to remain consistent with and equivalent to. If you go to the as stringent as, there's
Representative, I just asked, and is the logic behind that? Because as a federal legislation changes, our standards would change with it. Does the language of the Environment Committee bind us to a standard that may become invalidated by the federal? Just trying to figure out why the difference.
no, and it kind of, the concern is almost the reverse. The concern is that if it's consistent with and equivalent to, and Congress changes the current Federal Clean Water Act to make it much less protective, does Vermont's program have to be much less protective in order to be consistent and equivalent to? Or can it be at least as stringent as, and then the secretary, she can adopt rules or just keep in place the current program because it would be at least as stringent as, but more protective. So that is the debate. There is concern, I think, anxiety from the agencies about what maybe a future administration would do if it says as stringent as. I think there's also anxiety about what the advocates will ask for if it's as stringent as. Whereas consistent and equivalent, it's a known universe, right? They know what the feds say to do. And so they don't have anxiety about the unknown. But I do think, and Rep. Logan is the reporter of this bill, and she very clearly and concisely laid out that concern that I just explained to Rep. Holcomb about why, if it's consistent with an equivalent to, you could actually be tying yourself to less protection. So moving on from there, you can see all the authority the secretary would have. She can adopt rules. She can adopt procedures, guidelines, etc. She can designate any AFO that meets the definition of CAFO as a CAFO, require any CAFO to obtain the CAFO permit, designate any small AFO as a CAFO. After on-site inspection, they determine it's necessary. and there's criteria that she will look at in determining if it's necessary. She cannot accept private or public property to inspect. I was asked in one committee whether or not that means that she can walk onto land without notifying the property owners, and I said yes, and she was directly behind me, and she said, no, that's not what we do. So just so that you know that. Section 1353 is the CAFO permit. When you are required, you have to have a discharge permit. You have to have an actual discharge. There's been litigation about whether or not a state or EPA could require a farm that might discharge or has the potential to discharge to get a permit. And the courts have said, no, the Clean Water Act says actual discharges. So you need to have an actual discharge in order to be required to get a CAFO permit. I'm going to talk about something called the precipitation-related discharge in a minute. But I think you can like skip through most of the language. There's going to be a community stakeholder group that's going to look at the regulatory structure for CAFOs, whether or not it ensures compliance with the Clean Water Act, how to align it best with the Secretary of Ag's authority, how to create regulatory clarity, the resources necessary. They're going to give you a report February 15, 2026 with their recommendations, including any statutory amendment or other changes related to implementation of the program. Then you get a bunch of conforming amendments. 10 VSA 1259 is the general discharge prohibition, but there are presumptions that maybe even exemptions that are built into it for ag. And right now, if you're just complying with the required ag practices, you're presumed not to have a discharge. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore if you actually have been determined to have a point source discharge. Your compliance with the RAPs is not going to allow you to escape that permit. Striking the MOU language, going back to the document, and it replaces the existing MOU. All of this, the language you've already seen. A discharge permit in section 11, again, there's a provision related to I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. This is the section that directs the secretary to amend and issue a CAFO general permit for farms that are determined to need it. And then this is a large CAFO. Remember, I talked about when a medium CAFO needed a permit, when there was an actual discharge to a ditch, et cetera, or when the discharge originated outside the production area and wandered through it or came in contact with the animals. There is a third way a large CAFO can be determined to have a discharge, and that's called the ag stormwater provision. So when you are land applying your manure or nutrients, if you are land applying it according to a site-specific nutrient management plan and it rains and that manure or nutrients run off into the waters, that's not a discharge. Because that's a precipitation-related discharge when you are land applying according to your site-specific.
Is it a precipitous precipitation related?
Pardon?
Sorry.
Precipitous, yeah.
That's good.
They are supposed to determine if there's going to be a risk.
I would think so.
But if they are land applying and they have the buffers, they're supposed to be able to do it in certain conditions. So this is different from the medium farms. This is a provision that basically requires farms to get nutrient management plans. Nutrient management plans can be expensive. Nutrient management plans under this are going to be public. They're going to be part of the permit process. Anyone will be able to see your nutrient management plan for your farm. I don't know how they're going to do it because nutrient management plans for most medium and large farms are volumes or multiple volumes. And so that's going to be interesting.
Well, the internet's is capable of storing a lot of information.
Yeah, but they're really technical. They're like maps and like Russell rates and all kinds of things.
Are
And
they stored in individual homes or in town office?
they will be stored with A&R,
Oh.
right? Right.
Or how does the farmer consult it when he's on?
Well, they're going to have their own, but the public version of it has to be submitted during the application process.
In the past, there was large controversy of location of drainage tiles and someone not wanting to disclose where they were located. So that would be then publicly available.
Maybe.
Okay.
You're like into the,
Weeds, I know.
no, you're into like the scary thing.
Yeah. I'll come back out. You don't have to inspect.
Thank you.
Right.
Because nobody really knows how subsurface tile drainage is uniformly regulated.
You know, it's, we can,
Yeah, yeah.
thank you.
We'll get to the fees, yeah.
Well, you've already
That's why he's here.
you've already done the fees. There is another one that I skipped over. It's the $1,500 fee for the medium farm operation. It doesn't change. If you are not required to get a medium CAFO, you pay your medium farm operation fee, and it's $1,500. Let me see if I can find that. And that's really it. Now, the Committee on Environment, as I've already said, wants to replace that as equivalent and consistent with the term as stringent as. They also want the agency to propose a inspection schedule for how often they're going to inspect large CAFOs, medium CAFOs, or any farm. That was a little bit of a bone of contention at first. It's still not fully digestible to some people, but the agency did not object to that. But in any event, there are a bunch of conforming changes in the House Environment proposal, because if you go with at least as stringent as, then you have to also kind of recognize that there might be more than just the federal. So whenever it says you need to comply with the federal regulations or the rules adopted by the secretary. And that you will see the most of the House Environment changes are, or DIPT's rules adopted by the secretary. And so that's what you will see right here, or by the DIPT's CAFO rule, or by the DIPT's CAFO rule, or by the DIPT's CAFO rule. And then you get to their change to at least as stringent as the Federal Clean Water Act. Then as part of a report they're already doing, that proposed inspection schedule, the DIPT's CAFO rule, the DIPT's CAFO rule, the DIPT's CAFO rule. And then there's what's being called the clamp.
Oh,
Because of the concern that the Clean Water Act would change, and any reference that's already in law to it would have to change with that change to the federal law. This is saying that any reference to the Clean Water Act currently in the Ag Water Quality or A&R Water Quality chapters is going to stay as applied and interpreted as those laws existed on January 1, 2025, regardless of any subsequent amendment, repeal, or other substantive change. And this would be repealed on April 1st, 2029. This is partly in response to some executive orders directing all federal agencies to repeal rules that are based on one of 10 court decisions. And one of those court decisions is Chevron versus NRDC, and Chevron is a very important case for environmental law because it allows agencies to be deferred to when there's ambiguous law in the statute. And that has led to rules. And the administration has said, repeal those. Well, if you repeal them, it's like digging out the basement without digging out the surface, right? It's just gonna cave in.
I did that.
And
Did it hear?
and it'll be really difficult to implement those programs. And so that is what the clamp is about.
Questions?
No, I don't think quite yet.
That's it.
That's it? That's everything? That's everyone's. Both amendments,
Both amendments.
bill. Okay, questions? Yes, Representative Brannigan.
I have two.
And then we'll get to the fiscal questions after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Okay.
wait for that.
Good.
The last time I came in contact with this issue, the farmers and the ANR people were in a blood feud. And they were each hanging on to their territory forever. How did this get settled? And now it's in the lap of the time? Is that correct? That
Right, I think the blood feud would have continued, except the sheriff came to town and the sheriff is EPA saying, you have to do this,
okay,
or else there's gonna be consequences.
yeah,
And so the sheriff sided with A.
okay. So the feud is over?
No, I don't know about that.
Okay,
It's better than it used to be, I can say that.
that's good. It's a step. My second question is regarding the volunteer groups that deal with clean water. Do any of these changes affect the amount of money that gets funneled down to them? I'm talking about those small 8 people, 10 people it might be a couple of them in each county.
Not this won't affect them. It affects, as James will tell you, what money might go into which agency's fund, but
Okay.
neither of those funds are used for those grants to the
Friends of,
right, Farmers
Friends of-
Welfare Alliance or.
Are you allowed to tell me that initial trickling of surface water that went into the lake that started this whole thing? Was that, and the EPA found out about it? Was that in Franklin County? Were you-
I mean, this started in like 1996, so,
Oh,
right.
forget.
think,
I thought you meant it was a recent thing that EPA got all worked up and that's why we landed.
No, what was recent was the environmental advocates petitioned EPA to de-delegate the state. And in doing so, they provided us a record appendix of all of the information that they had gathered, indicating that there had been discharges that had not been permitted.
I lost touch. I lost a whole couple of years.
Representative Higley.
I noticed that the environments amendment was voted out 7-4. And did the Ag Committee have an opportunity to approve or not? Or what was the vote for?
I walked them through it today, but there were a couple of members missing, so they didn't vote they had not voted when I had left. I don't know what their plan is. I did think they were going to hear from the agencies.
You
Sorry.
you know where I stand then. I mean,
Okay, great. Any other questions for Michael?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Oh, sorry, Jim.
Yeah, couple things.
That was on me this time, not Jim. Just
Right.
he
Nice
raised
to be here. I remember some of the stuff from when I was in natural resources, rather speaking, and it's just the same but different. But my financial questions are, I mean, clearly we want not to lose designation because Vermonters would be working through folks in Boston instead of our own people, I think, for the most, which make life very difficult and complicated, but the cost concerns I have had to do with, if this goes forward, there will be costs to farmers, seems to me, because the requirements of compliance, even as you described them, are gonna be more complicated than what we have to do right now. And I just, in general terms, it seems to me that farmers will have to pay, will be saddled with costs.
I think we'll hear from James that the revenue to the state is identical.
But for cost, it depends on your farm. You're not supposed to have a discharge in Vermont.
Understood.
And if you are actually doing that, you probably won't have that much extra cost.
Okay,
But if you have issues that are identified, you will have costs.
okay, and that's good. We can wait for James to. Look into it. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
James Duffy, Joint Fiscal Office. This bill, as you just heard from Michael, has, a number of policy changes in terms of how ANR oversees concentrated animal feeding operations in the state. From a fiscal point of view, this bill has a de minimis fiscal impact on the state. Essentially, what it does is it takes an existing universe of farmers who today either have a medium farm operations permit or a large farm operations permit. Did I get that right? MFO or yes, LFO. And a subset of that universe would be required, depending on the nature of their activities, to instead have a CAFO permit. Now, the CAFO permit would be issued by ANR. The farm operations permits, which they currently hold, are issued by AAFM. So what that means is the permit amounts are not changing. If I'm a farmer paying $1,500 for my medium farm operations permit right now, I will pay $1,500 for my CAFO permit, should I be required to have one.
And you only need.
I won't hold both. I will only be required to pay one permit fee. It may be the case that I would hold both permits, but I would only, and then Michael can see, yeah, Michael's nodding yes, but I would only pay one fee.
But it's gonna be rare.
And that's the same case for the large farm operations permit. So my costs as a farmer for fees relating to these two permit programs do not change. I'll only ever be required to pay one fee, and that amount is not changing. But what that means from the state's point of view is some permit fees that are now paid to the Agricultural Water Quality Special Fund for those farm operations permits would now flow instead to the Environmental Permit Fund, which is used by ANR. So both of those special funds are used to support permit and compliance enforcement activities at their respective agencies. Ag Water Quality Special Fund for AAFM, Environmental Permit Fund for ANR. And so what this bill would do is change the flow of some permit fee revenue from the Ag Water Quality Fund to the Environmental Permit Fund.
And
But it wouldn't change the total amount being received by the state.
my understanding, you're talking to someone from the Agency of Agriculture, is that the Agricultural Water Quality Special Fund is already regularly backfilled from other funds anyway. And so having less money in it doesn't change anyone's life at all.
That's, well, yes, if that's, I'm
Is
glad
that
to hear that
correct?
I can't speak to.
Changing people's
Should-
lives, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, but, I'm glad to hear that that's the AIFM's read on the situation, yeah. And there are currently 98 medium farm permits and 36 large farm permits, that are overseen by AIFM, that are generating revenue for the Ag Water Quality Special Fund. Michael noted that, and you just noted, Chair, that there are routine backfills that are being made into the Ag Water Quality Special Fund during the annual budgeting cycles, to help make sure the fund has sufficient funds in it to meet its purposes. I'll just note that these farm operations permits only generate about $240,000 annually for the Ag Water Quality Special Fund. Recent transfers from the Clean Water Fund to the Ag Water Quality Special Fund have been on the order of $6.7 million. So the revenue generated by these fees is quite small compared to the kind of routine backfills that are being made to the Ag Water Quality Special Fund.
I don't want to get into this right now because it doesn't really have that much to do with this bill, but it would be interesting at some point to uncover why we even have these special funds if we're routinely backfilling them from other funds. But that's not a project for today. Today, our project is just to vote on this bill. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So my understanding from JFO's report is there was no consideration for the Environment Committee's amendment, which looks at staffing possibilities, yearly inspections for 134 farms and all that, correct?
Thank you, Representative. That is correct. And that's, so the amendment that came out of House Environment has not changed the fiscal note that JFO prepared. The reason for that being, in my understanding, is it gives the agency discretion and authority to perhaps go beyond federal requirements. But as I understand the amendment, it's not a directive to do so, doesn't contain appropriations to meet those potential additional activities, and is an authorization as opposed to a directive to take that specific action.
Well, I'm just reading it here. The Secretary of Natural Resources shall, as part of a report required in the session, propose a plan for inspection of animal feeding operations, blah, blah, blah. So that to me means that they will. So at some point, there will be a cost. Correct?
It's just a plan. So you would have to implement it through legislation and appropriation. It's just a plan.
Okay.
So on the money piece, so 239,000 is going to the Department of Agriculture right now, and 6.7 million is coming from the Clean Water Fund. What is the source of the Clean Water Fund?
Clean Water Fund has three sources. So that's meals and rooms tax, it's sheets, unclaimed bottle deposits,
Yes.
and surcharge. Thank you very much. Yes, the clean water surcharge on the property transfer tax are the three revenue sources in the Clean Water Fund. I believe part of those annual deposits to the Ag Water Quality Special Fund from the Clean Water Fund are for like predetermined policy purposes. They're not all for unforeseen deficits in the Ag Water Quality Special Fund. But some recent transfers to the Ag Water Quality Special Fund have been.
So was there discussion about, because some of the costs are going to transfer over to ANR for administering this particular, the CAFO permits, right? So I'm just wondering if it's anticipated that money will go from the Clean Water Fund to fund those operations at ANR.
I believe that really the intent of the permit fees, as they're deposited into either one of these special funds, is to help the agencies cover the associated costs of permit writing, compliance, inspections, enforcement. I'm not aware of any conversations about Clean Water Fund transfers to the agency, specific appropriations to rather. And I can say some of the money that goes to AFM from the Clean Water Fund is for non-point source pollution control projects that might, still very much be the purview of AFM.
Okay, so it's still just the cost of the total program now is 6.7 million plus the 239, so call it $7 million. So not all of that cost is going to move to ANR. Some of it is.
And I'd expect that the legislature would hear from ANR in future budget cycles as these changes are implemented and as resource needs are identified to the extent that they change as a result of this new kind of schema.
Doubt ANR's gonna ask for more money.
And I don't mean to imply that.
No, I didn't. I was saying that to Charlie, not to you. I'm sorry. Any further questions on fiscal note? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you need a motion on the amendment first or on the bill first or?
I don't, we do have possession. We need a motion. The motion is on the bill as it came to us, so we don't vote on the amendment and the bill because it's not our amendment. I'd really like to vote today so that the bill can continue on its life passage. But we could wait until tomorrow morning at 9 if that would greatly improve anyone's life, or if folks think that their vote might change between now and tomorrow morning at 9.
Wouldn't mind, again,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to some people from the
Okay,
ag
cool.
community,
Okay,
because it's pretty critical to me.
yeah, of course.
You know, I don't really appreciate what we're doing here a lot with some of this stuff in regards to the feds.
Mhm.
I mean, it could work the other way eventually too. And-
Yeah.
Anyway,
So we will hold off on a vote on this until tomorrow morning at 9. Would love for everyone to be here for that. And I guess it could be 9:15 because we're not doing anything else before the floor, right?
That's true.
Yeah, okay, 9:15.
No, I'm great, I just. For those of us around the table, I'm very comfortable with Bill, familiar with what's in it, and be content to vote for it when we vote for it.
Great, thanks, Jim.